Hi, I'm Kathryn.
And I'm Theresa.
And we are the co-authors of the book, Pass the Baton, Empowering All Music Students.
Our goal is to share stories of educators who are passing the baton and empowering their music students. We want to help teachers create music lessons that transform students from passive consumers to vibrant creatives. Welcome back to the Pass the Baton podcast. We're here to talk about all things student empowerment and music education. Before we introduce today's guest, we want to remind you to follow or subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss any future episodes.
In addition, if you like what you hear today, please consider leaving a rating and a review. That's what helps podcasts like Pass the Baton grow. So what'd you think, Theresa?
This was great. I'm so glad that we finally got to connect with Lori and have the conversation about reflection. As she was talking, I'm realizing I don't think early in my career, I even understood what reflection was or why it was so important.
Yeah. And I love that she mentioned too, like she was talking about as a student herself, was she reflective of her learning in her classroom? And it made me think in my as a student myself, like, I don't think I was asked often, and how really valuable that is. And I think as teachers now, we just think we don't have time. We got to do the next thing, but there's so much power in reflection.
Absolutely. It's all of these things that we talk about. If you take the time, I think it pays off twice as much. Okay, welcome back, everybody. It's great to be here again. We are so excited to be joined by today's guest, Lori Schwartz Reichl. Hi, Lori.
Hi, so nice to see you. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. It's funny, before we started recording, Kathryn was saying, so how do you know Lori again? I was like, oh my goodness. I feel like there's been so many different little ways that our paths have crossed over the years. So it's been very fun. But why don't we start? Can you introduce yourself? Tell us about your background, what you're up to these days?
Sure. Well, I guess I'll first start about how I became a music educator. So I grew up in a very small town in rural Pennsylvania, Manchester, Pennsylvania, where I went to school for the Northeastern School District, where my father was my elementary and high school band director. And my mother was also a large part of my life too. She was a reading and English teacher in the area. And after starting college for business, I eventually transferred schools and majors to go into music education. I returned to my passion of music and teaching. I started my career in the Daniel Boone School District in 2002, where I was responsible for 212 middle school musicians who at the age of 23, I looked probably similar to some of them at the time. But it was a great opportunity for me to learn about classroom management and building and growing a program and connecting with a community and building relationships. And 5 years later, I ended up in Howard County, Maryland, because my husband, who is an electrical engineer, is stationed for work in that area. And so I ended up moving there and starting a job in Howard County. And I worked at Oakland Mills Middle School, and it was by far completely different from where I had been working previously. It was a diverse group of students, race, ethnically, language-wise, nationality. It was exactly what I needed to reflect on what my upbringing and start in teaching was and where I was going from there. The school is also placed in corrective action. It was a Title I school. And even with these challenges and limitations, we learned how to grow as a music program and to make great music together based on making wonderful relationships together. I was there for 8 years, and I eventually moved on to the newest middle school in Howard County, where my principal at the time had asked if I would like to start the music program there. And so I moved with her, although quite sad to leave the former community that I was with. I was ready for a new challenge and a change. And so I then opened Thomas Viaduct Middle School in Howard County Public School System. And a year and a half in, at the age of 37, I had my first child, Harper, who is now 7 years old. And I made a very clear decision at the time that I was going to go on leave from the school system. I wanted to work part-time, and the school system wouldn't take a full-time position and make it part-time. And so I continued on leave for those several years. And it was my mission to stay as relevant in that time and to learn as much as I could in that time. So during that time, while raising both of my children. So Harper's 7 now, and my son Hudson is 5. We had some great memories and have had some great memories during that time, but I also earned my administrator certificate. So if I wanted to be an administrator, I earned that. And then I also recently earned my doctorate in music education. So that's been exciting. But during that time, I've had some really great opportunities to really reflect on what my passion in the profession is and how I wanted to help others. And so mentorship and motivation has always been a great thing for me to really jump into. I've just loved it. It's really always ignited my passion for what I do. And so these last several years, I've been providing a lot of professional development for teachers. I get the opportunity to do a lot of guest conducting at both the middle school and high school level, mostly for bands, adjudicating, and so forth. And then the bulk of my work is writing. And so I put out a monthly article each month and also a monthly newsletter. And the content is encouraging educators, administrators, really anybody to reflect on our practices and how we want to make key changes to enrich the classroom or the company or the community. And so these opportunities have led to some really great things, meeting wonderful people like yourself and getting to really travel the world, both virtually and in person, meeting new teachers and students and so forth. Yeah,
that's wonderful. It sounds like so much fun, just new learning and meeting new people. That sounds great. I know you mentioned, just now often quite about reflection. So maybe we could start with why is reflection important? And who, when you say reflection, do you mean students? Do you mean teachers? Do you mean everyone?
Oh, yes, everyone. So reflection is important because it's necessary for growth and improvement, and everyone should reflect. That could be administrators within our schools and school leaders. It can be educators, teachers, staff, parents or caregivers, and even students. And so I often talk about how it's important for students to reflect too. I think about my upbringing and I think about, was I encouraged to reflect as a student? And I think back, although my memory is not all that great, and I don't recall a lot of times where I was encouraged by a teacher or a band director or a music educator to really reflect on what I was doing. I know that those conversations happened at home, but they didn't always happen within academic classrooms or learning spaces. And so when we reflect on what we're doing, we can end up doing more or having more or making more. And so sometimes that doesn't mean that we need more and many things. Maybe we are getting rid of something that's not working or not necessary. Maybe we're adding something to our plate. Maybe we're taking it away or something. But we can't move forward with renewed energy and intention until we know what is working, what's not working, and what's missing or even unnecessary in our teaching strategies or our rehearsal techniques. And reflection asks us answers. It makes us think about things like, are we providing mirrors and windows for our students to experience music and learning in more than one way? And so my doctoral thesis was entitled The Student Voice: Perception of Students' Representation of Themselves in the Curriculum. And I surveyed students throughout the nation and asked them questions about, do they see themselves in the curriculum? Have they had a person with the same gender or the same race or nationality or disability and so forth? And it was an opportunity for them to reflect on what they were seeing, hearing, or experiencing within their curriculum or their classroom, or in this case, in their secondary band curriculum. And it was eye-opening to hear what they had to say. And it was eye-opening as an educator to reflect on their answers and to realize, are we, am I, are you, are our colleagues providing mirrors, meaning an opportunity for our students to see, hear, or experience themselves in the curriculum or the classroom? Do I see a female on the podium? Do I see a person of color as a composer? Am I experiencing the work of a different gender and so forth? And then also asking the question, are we providing windows for our students, meaning an avenue for them to look to or into or through something different, to experience music from somewhere else or from a different composer or a different genre or so forth. So that was the bulk of my doctoral work, and I loved it. And it really gave me the opportunity to not only hear the students' voices, but then to reflect. And I often say, shame on me. I didn't always do that in my teaching. And early on, I can tell you, I certainly didn't do that. And I didn't do it if I did, I didn't do it in a very structured format. But now I've been able to set up different ways that I can do that, reflecting with students, or how I want to reflect with educators and so forth. And so once we do that, we're allowing the true student voice to come through if they're willing to share with us. Sometimes they only share so much, but maybe it starts out small and maybe they're willing to share and reflect more as they feel comfortable in our learning spaces.
Yeah, that was actually going to be one of my questions you kind of alluded to. How did the students react to being asked those things and being asked to think and to reflect on what they were experiencing?
So are you referring to through
your doctoral work? Yeah, when you were asking those.
So it was all anonymous. So it was done through a Google survey. Mm-hmm. So I knew to what areas of the country the survey was going. And sometimes I knew to what program, although I had no idea if it was a band student, an orchestra, that sort of thing. I had no idea what grade they were in, which ensemble I didn't know their names or anything like that.
Okay.
So yeah, that was all anonymous.
Okay. Well then, yeah, that makes sense. Okay. Well, I guess then that also leads a little bit to my next question though. So how do you go about incorporating this in the day-to-day? So not doctoral work, but how do you incorporate this reflection?
Right. So I think when we're talking about reflection, we have to realize that we can't just reflect. If we're only reflecting, then we're not taking the information and using it in the best possible way to adapt our teaching and to adapt the students' learning. And so I don't know if this has been said before, but I call these the 3 R's for the Reichl rules. So they're the 3 R's. And the first one is to reflect, which is what we're talking about. So what am I doing, or what are we doing as a music class or an ensemble or even a school, or a community? But what are we doing, or how, when, where, and what is its impact? So reflecting on as simple as I'll do a music specific example. What music am I choosing? Maybe which composers, what genre? Even from, am I choosing music that's all the same time signature or the same key signature or the same types of pieces or lengths of pieces? So even reflecting on that. So that's the first R. And then the second R is research. So what else could I be doing, or what else could we be doing? Who else could I be inviting in as a composer? And I don't mean just physically, but bringing their music into my space, into my ensemble, into my classroom. And why would I want to add this composer, or would I want to eliminate certain music, or just change it up a little bit? So researching and then knowing where to look for that. Can I go to a database? Can I ask a colleague like yourself? Can I go to a concert and hear what they're performing there? And then the third R is to refresh. And so how did I respond, or how did my students respond when I refreshed based on what I reflected on? So if I put a new composer and their music in front of them, how did my students respond? And why did they respond in that way? Did they respond because, oh my gosh, Dr. Reichl, I've never played music performed by a female identifying composer, or I've never performed music by someone who is physically disabled, or a person of color, or this is the second person I've played. Da, 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 da. And so once we refresh, then the final, I'll probably like the fourth R, but I sort of added in there to refresh is to review. Mm-hmm. Once we've refreshed our strategies, now what? Are we going to keep with them, or are we going to change it again? And to remember that this process is constant. We always need to be reflecting. We always need to be researching, and we always need to be refreshing and reviewing. And if we don't, we get stagnant in our work, and we've all gotten there. I mean, we can all be honest. We've all gotten to the place where maybe we use the same music or composer or strategies over again. But if we like seriously reflect, how does that feel? Are we energized as teachers when we use the same things over and over again? Are our students, now if it's a different group of students, sure, that works. But how are we presenting? You know, I can tell you if I'm using the same piece over and over and over again, I'm not as excited about it each time. So, for instance, if I'm guest conducting, I might use a lot of the same pieces within the same year because those are with different students. But each year then, I'm refreshing those pieces or a couple pieces for each different ensemble and so forth.
Yeah. So how does reflection empower teachers, and even how does it empower students?
So I wrote an article in September 2023 entitled "The Student Voice, Are We Listening and Adapting?" And it was primarily based off of my doctoral studies and my thesis in a much shorter, condensed, non-scholarly vocabulary used throughout. But it was really about, like, are we listening as teachers, as educators, as music directors, and then are we adapting? And I think it can empower and benefit both the teacher and the student. And so the three things I talk about a lot, and also in my doctoral studies, are three considerations to have. One, the first consideration is feel. How do students feel in our classrooms or in our ensembles? Do they feel welcome? Do they feel as though they can share their emotions? Do they feel as though they see, hear, experience themselves in the classroom, the curriculum, the repertoire, and so forth? And, you know, feeling is a huge thing, because if they don't want to be there, that's going to come out in their feelings and in their emotions, or if they don't feel welcome in our spaces. And then the second consideration is interpret. How do students interpret the content that we're teaching, or the lesson, or the experience, and so forth? So what are they interpreting in what they see? If they're seeing, you know, all of the same people on, it could be photographs in our classrooms, it could be posters, it could be from the composers that were of music that we're performing, learning, playing, singing, and so forth. It could be what they're hearing, it could be what they're experiencing, but what are they interpreting? And it could even be, what are they interpreting from us? Are we energized about what we're teaching? Are we passionate? Are we committed? Do they see us coming prepared? You know, how many times do we go into maybe observe someone or a classroom or just pop in or something, and the teacher's not prepared, they're not on time, or they haven't marked their score, or they can't define the vocabulary? Well, if we can't do that, what are students interpreting? You know, they're not seeing us come prepared, so why would they need to be prepared? You know, so consideration number 2, interpretation. And then consideration number 3 is, how do students learn? And this can be from differentiating instruction to, are they visual, auditory, reading, writing, kinesthetic learners? And it could be as simple as, do they need to see something? Do they need to hear it? Would they better understand something if they wrote it, or if they read about it, or if they did it? Do they have to move their body with it? And sometimes we think that the kinesthetic learning is best for elementary students, but sometimes we need to get the older students out of their seats and be able to move and so forth. And so thinking about not just their learning style, but also what pace. And I see that as a parent now, I see that with my own children. You know, sometimes my 7-year-old is learning at a slower pace than my 5-year-old. And sometimes my 7-year-old can do much more than what my 5-year-old can. And just seeing the differences within what they can handle, the pace at which they learn, how they retain information, and so forth. So how does reflection empower teachers and students? Well, first, it gives teachers that empowerment to get the student voice going, asking them, how are you feeling? You know, what are you interpreting here? And how are you learning? And then it gives students the empowerment to say, this is how I feel. Or when you do this, this is what I think you're saying, or what I think you're doing. Or when you come into the classroom late, I don't feel like I need to show up on time. You know, Or if we pick up our instrument and we can't master a passage of music, what is that saying to our students? It doesn't have to be perfect. I mean, if I pick something up I haven't played in a while, it's, I might miss a pitch here or there, but can we demonstrate to the best of our ability? And then how do they learn? Are we asking them that? And maybe they don't know. I had this conversation with a couple of people when I was doing my research, and they said, Lori, sometimes students don't know how they learn. They might not, but they might be able to tell you that they prefer this, or they feel more comfortable doing this. And so that may then, get us to the answer of, are they more a visual learner? Or maybe they're a little bit of both, two different learning styles.
Yeah, that could be really empowering though, even when a kid doesn't know, but if you ask it enough times, then they start to think about it and like, oh, I am visual, or I really like it when I get to move and learn, so that's really empowering to them once they figure that out. And sometimes it just starts with asking the question. So.
And sometimes the way we ask the question, like for instance, are we asking it in a group? If the three of us are in a group and maybe Teresa's doing something much better than you and me, Kathryn, she's going to be more inclined to say answer, where we might be a little bit more timid. So we have to be really careful about when and where and how are we asking our students this. So if it's raise your hand if, or da-da-da-da,
Yeah.
Well, the most timid child, or even it could be the most confident child, but they might not be doing exactly the best they can at that point. So yes, we can sometimes ask in group settings, or we can ask them individually to speak to us on one-on-one, to write, it could be an email, it could be a Google survey, it could be an exit ticket or something in a journal or whatsoever, or it could be without knowing, not knowing, I was going to say unanimously, anonymously, confuse my words there, asking them anonymously, through a survey or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I love just doing like a little Post-it note that they stick on the door, because they can put, they can just say what it is. Doesn't have a name attached to it. Doesn't have anything like that, but yet they can. But obviously this doesn't work for everything. There are times that we need to know which child says which thing, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, like the idea of a sticker on the door, what's something that a teacher could try tomorrow?
Well,
or anyone can try tomorrow.
The sticky note on the door of the parking lot, that's actually somewhere where I was going to go with this next. So we could add a reflection piece at the end of our lesson or our rehearsal or whatever activity we have tomorrow. And it could be in the form of an exit ticket. So maybe you have something pre-made, like a half a sheet of paper. It could be completely blank, or it could have 3 pre-made questions on it. And it could be the same generic questions each time, or you can make it specific for whatever lesson you're doing. It could be a journal. Maybe if you keep a journal, like, what do you hear in this music? Whatever. You would probably come up with many better questions than me. It could be a sticky note. I use a lot of Jamboard links, particularly when I'm giving professional development to teachers, because one, it's anonymous. It's fun, it's colorful, it's using a device, but then I also have access to that at the end of the session, so I can go back and see and read, what were their responses and how they do that. And so I break reflection activities down into 4 categories. And so I think of it as an attitude of gratitude. And I do this whenever I give a professional development. And I also am doing it more often with students and even with my children. We're starting to talk about this a little bit at dinner or in the car when we're racing on to the next activity, because we just hit that phase in parenting. But attitude of gratitude, 4 categories. The first one being knowledge. What did you learn today during this lesson or this activity or during this rehearsal? It could be a vocabulary word. It could be a concept. It could be learning to play in a certain key signature or metric modulation or something like that. So first category being knowledge. And sometimes the students have trouble with this one because they might not have retained the vocabulary right away. So it might take them a couple of rehearsals or lessons until they get the music history knowledge or vocabulary down, or definitions. The second one being improvement. How did you make your playing, your singing, your writing, your composition better? Or what do you want to improve on based on this lesson or this rehearsal? So maybe they realize that something was a limitation and they want to get better, or maybe they're setting a goal, or maybe through that lesson or rehearsal, they have gotten better with X, Y, or Z. And then the third category being inspiration. Who, what, or why were you inspired through this lesson or this activity or this rehearsal? And sometimes the students, really struggle with this one, because sometimes they'll talk about, well, I didn't know how to do this, but then they're a little shy or timid about like who or what inspired them. But once we get them talking or thinking or writing about that, sometimes these can be the longest answers. And then the fourth category being gratitude. Like, what are you thankful for? Are you thankful for because, you were able to be in this class or this ensemble? Are you thankful because you learned something new? And it could be as simple as, I'm thankful because it's a sectional and I got out of math class. That's okay. That's the answer. Just get them thinking and reflecting and talking. And sometimes with our youngest learners, these answers can be quite unique and really funny, but then it gets us listening to them and thinking about like, okay, so maybe they don't like maths. They feel empowered in this class. They feel in control here. They're comfortable here. And then maybe that leads to conversations like, what's happening in the math class? Do they have the same relationship with the math teacher that they do with us? Why are they excited to be here and not there? And so sometimes these reflections don't have to do anything with music. They can do with other areas of learning or simply just being.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. As you're talking about these, especially the last four, it really makes me think about a lot of what you're doing is you're getting to know your students better. You're building that relationship. And that's been a theme for how many episodes now we've been talking about these ideas of building relationships and then also being able to build the community in your classroom. So that kind of also just segues really perfectly. Do you have any things that you do to either build relationships or build community with your students?
Yeah, I have a lot of things.
I'm sure. Go ahead.
Yeah. I think the first question for reflection we must ask ourselves, though, is how are we treating the students that we serve? So I hear so much in education about build relationships. And I think sometimes particularly younger teachers or pre-service teachers or think there must be 10 steps. I have to do this first and I have to do that and da-da-da-da. And it's as simple as, how are we treating them? Are we treating them beyond being a musician? Are we treating them as a human being? Are they excited to be in our presence? It doesn't mean that they have to be excited to come to band or to be in our general music class or our composition class or whatever it is, but are they excited to be with us? And I think that's the very first thing we have to ask. How are we treating our students and treating them beyond musicians? So we want to take the musicianship out first and think, are we treating them as human beings? Are we treating them as learners? And are we treating them as global citizens? Because if we can think of those three things first, the musicianship is going to come very easily. And then the next thing is, by building relationships, are we listening to what students say? And so I'm sort of going to coin your podcast here, but are we passing the baton to our students to allow them to have the voice? And so it's as simple as just listening to them. And it doesn't have to be anything music related. It could be, what did you watch on TV last night? Who did you listen to? What book did you read? What sports team are you cheering for? Do you like sports? If you're not watching sports, what else are you doing? it could be complimenting them. Oh, Theresa, you look so beautiful in that rustic color on you. And Kathryn, your curls are amazing. It could be as simple as that. Or, you like the Patriots? Who's the Patriots these days? And kind of like joking with them. So I think it has to do with nothing music related to begin with, but how are we treating our students and then building relationships with them in that way? And then are we focusing on the needs of our students as human beings, as learners, as global citizens? And then the musicianship will come. And my motto is embrace uniqueness. And it started out as a personal motto for me, and it was embrace my uniqueness or embrace your uniqueness. And over the years, I cut out the second word and I just say now embrace uniqueness, meaning, and that can have so many meanings, meaning the people that you're with. Kathryn and Theresa, you have so many strengths and they're so different than mine. And am I embracing your uniqueness with all the strengths? And we need to think about that from the lens of our colleagues who are around us and then our students. What are they bringing to the table when they come to our classroom or to our rehearsal? Or what are they not bringing to the table? What resource are they missing? What habit have they not learned yet? And that sort of thing. And so are we embracing the uniqueness of our students? And then are we making key changes in our teaching based on what we're learning from our students? And like I said earlier, we all learn and develop and achieve at different speeds. And if we don't build relationships with our students, we can't reflect on what their unique needs are and how they can achieve or what they need or how we can help them get to their greatest potential.
Yeah, I think that's it. Reflection and building relationships, they're both needed, right? To build relationships, you've got to reflect and know your kids. So how can people connect with you and find out more about your work?
They can come visit me at my house. No.
We'll be there.
Yes. Set that up very soon. They can visit me at my website, which is makingkeychanges.com. No www, just simply makingkeychanges.com. And it's basically an online portfolio of all of my work and what I'm doing. So if they wanted to read, I have about 100 articles. I'm almost at that 100 mark that I've written over the last several years. And Theresa said, go ahead and brag. So
yes.
So I'm so pleased over the last couple of weeks. I've learned over the last few years, I've had 1 or 2 articles per year make the top 10 list of the National Association for Music Education's most accessed article. And I found out that, again, 2 of my articles made the list this past year for 2022. And one of them came in at number 1. So that was really exciting. Ooh. And the irony is that neither of the articles are specific about music education. They're more about general education and concepts that could be utilized for anybody. So you can learn about me on my website. I'd love the opportunity to work with some of your valued listeners within their school systems for professional development or collaborating with them on so many different ways. So thank you so much for having me here. It's been so wonderful. I appreciate the opportunity to have my voice heard and valued. And I think highly of both of you so much and what you're doing. So congratulations on all of your achievements and what you've done with this series.
Oh, thank you. And thank you so much for being here. Yeah, we really do value your voice. So thanks. Thanks for joining us. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode.
We'd also love for you to consider sharing this podcast with a friend and leaving a positive review. That's one of the best ways to get this message to new listeners.